was a night like any other, and I was playing Fortnite with my friends Jake, Ryan, and Tyler. Jake was the best player among us, and always took the lead in matches. We were in the middle of a tense battle when, all of a sudden, Jake stopped, moving in the game. At first we thought he had gotten distracted or maybe his internet had gone out, but when Ryan called his name over the mic multiple times and got no response, we started to worry. Everything was silent until, out of nowhere, we heard a terrifying scream through our headsets, followed by the loud slam of a door. The sound was so unexpected that we froze for a few seconds. My heart started racing. I grabbed my phone and called Jake over and over, but he didn't answer. Since we lived nearby, I decided to go to his house and see what was going on. When I arrived, a chill ran down my spine as I noticed the front door was slightly open. The garage was empty, and there were no signs of movement inside. I called out for Jake a few times, but there was no answer. I stepped inside cautiously, feeling the tension in the air. The silence was absolute. I walked up the stairs carefully, and as I got closer to his room, I finally heard a faint sound coming from inside. Jake's trembling voice was coming from under the bed. I dropped to my knees and lifted the blanket to look underneath. He was curled up, shaking, his eyes wide with pure terror. Before I could ask anything, he grabbed my arm and pulled me under the bed with him, begging me to stay hidden. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of the situation. I pressed him for answers, desperate to know what was happening. Still gasping for air, Jake finally explained. While he was playing, he had felt something move under his bed. At first, he thought it was just his imagination or maybe a pet. But when he lifted the blanket to check, he froze in fear. There was a man under his bed, a stranger, an adult, just lying there staring at him. Jake screamed and tried to run, but the man crawled out from under the bed with an eerie calmness. Without saying a word, he simply stood up and walked down the hallway like he belonged there. Panicked, Jake dove back under the bed, too terrified to move. We had no idea if that man was still in the house. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the entire house but found no one. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had even been there. But the fear in Jake's eyes was real. That night, I stayed over at his place. After what happened, neither of us wanted to sleep alone. The police never found any explanation for it. After that night, we kept playing Fortnite, but Jake never played, alone in his room again. I was never really good at Fortnite, but my friends were obsessed with it. Since I wasn't the best player, I usually got left behind in matches. To get better, I decided to practice on my own and started joining games with random players online. In one of those matches, I got paired up with a player named Bob Rocket 16. We lost pretty quickly, but right after, I got a message from him saying I played well and that we should team up more often. I thought it was weird because, honestly, I hadn't played well at all. In the next round, he turned on his mic and tried to start a conversation. The problem was, I didn't have a mic to respond. At first, he seemed friendly, but as the game went on, he started getting annoyed at my silence. He kept asking me to turn on my mic and eventually started cursing at me. I ignored it, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. He called me by my full name. I froze. My real name wasn't anywhere on my profile, so how did he know? I immediately shut off my console and texted my friends to tell them what had happened. They just laughed and said I was overreacting. But a few minutes later, I got a message on my phone from an unknown number. When I looked at it, I felt a chill run down my spine. My full name written in all caps. I replied asking who it was, but before I got an answer, another message came through. This time it was my full home address. Panic set in. I tried to play it off and responded that they had the wrong person, hoping to throw them off. But whoever it was never replied again. That night, I tried to push the fear aside and went to bed. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. My heart started pounding when I heard knocking on my window. Instead of looking, I ran to the bathroom and locked myself inside. I stayed there all night, only coming out when the sun came up. I never found out who it was. and I never played with strangers again. My 10-year-old son, Chris, was obsessed with Fortnite. He spent hours playing and made friends with all kinds of people online. I was already a little worried about it, but I had no idea the danger that was waiting for us. It was around 9 p.m. when Chris walked out of his room and casually said, "My friend from the game is coming over." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, a stranger he met online was coming to our house?" I asked who it was, and Chris just shrugged. He said he didn't know how old the guy was, but that he seemed older. Right then and there, I locked every door and window and told Chris to go back to his room. I sat in the living room watching through the window. A few minutes later, a car pulled up in front of our house. A man got out. He looked to be around 40 years old and was wearing a dark hoodie. He walked calmly up to the front door and knocked. I ignored it. After a few moments, he started walking around the house toward the backyard. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest when I saw the doorknob on the back door start to turn. I yanked up the window blinds, and at that exact moment, he turned his face toward me. His expression was empty, like he was just waiting to see what I would do. My first instinct was to shout that I was calling the police. He stared at me for a few more seconds, then turned around, got back into his car, and drove away. Slowly, like he wanted me to know he could come back anytime. Right then, I unplugged Chris's game console and gave him a serious talk. He didn't understand how dangerous the situation was. To him, it was just a friend from the game. But what if I hadn't been there? What if Chris had opened the door? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window waiting to see if the car would come back. After that, I never let my son play online without supervision again.